I came home to an empty house, bills unpaid, and a note that said, "You're on your own." My own father and mother had vanished, waiting for me to leave so they could abandon me. I stood frozen in the doorway for a long moment, staring at the silence, listening to nothing but the faint hum of the refrigerator. Every corner of that house, every photograph on the wall, every little thing I had trusted suddenly felt like a lie. My name is Aaliyah Carter, and for as long as I could remember, I believed in family. I believed that love wasn't conditional, that loyalty wasn't something you had to earn. Growing up, my parents had always seemed so reliable. My father, a stern but loving man, and my mother, gentle yet strong, always making sure I had what I needed. I trusted them completely, but standing there that night, that trust shattered. The note lay on the kitchen counter, scrawled in my mother's handwriting. "You're on your own. Don't try to find us." I almost laughed, thinking it was a cruel joke. But when I called my father's cell, the line went straight to voicemail. My mother's number? Same thing. I tried neighbors, friends, anyone who might know, but no one had seen them. It was like they had disappeared into thin air, and somehow they expected me to understand. I sank to the floor, tears blurring my vision, and replayed every memory of my family. The birthdays I had celebrated, the times I had stayed up helping my father with paperwork, the nights I had comforted my mother through her own worries. All of it felt meaningless now. I had been abandoned, betrayed in the cruelest way by the people I had believed would never leave me. The first night was the hardest. I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind against the window, felt like a reminder that I was utterly alone. My heart ached with disbelief, but somewhere beneath that pain, a spark of resolve began to grow. They had left me, yes. They had abandoned me, yes. But I wasn't going to let their betrayal define me. Over the next few days, reality set in. The bills weren't going to pay themselves, the rent wasn't going to cover the utilities, and groceries weren't going to appear magically. I had to act. I started small, making a list of overdue payments, contacting creditors, and rearranging my modest savings. Every little action reminded me that I could survive on my own, that I didn't need anyone who had turned their back on me. I also started observing. Quietly, I noticed patterns in what had been left behind. The way my parents had organized their finances, hints of their routines, small details they thought I wouldn't notice. It wasn't revenge yet. It was learning, understanding. I was beginning to see the world through a lens I hadn't needed before. A lens of self-reliance, awareness, and eventually, power. For weeks, I worked tirelessly. My job at the small accounting firm became my anchor. My colleagues noticed the determination in my eyes, but none of them knew the real reason. I wasn't just working to pay bills, I was building myself back up, one careful step at a time. I began budgeting, planning, and saving, not for survival alone, but for the day I could confront the void my family had left. It wasn't easy. Loneliness pressed down like a heavy weight. Some nights, I called my friends, my cousins, anyone who might remind me that I wasn't completely invisible. But slowly, even those calls became less frequent. I had to focus on myself. I had to rebuild my world from scratch, and as much as it hurt, there was a strange clarity in being alone. No one could betray me if I relied solely on myself. During one of those long nights, I sat at the kitchen table with the note still lying in front of me. The words, "You're on your own," no longer cut like they had on the first night. Instead, they became a challenge. Every act of abandonment, every moment of neglect had given me insight, an understanding of what it truly meant to stand alone and survive. It was terrifying, yes, but it was also liberating. I realized that the power to shape my life wasn't in their hands. It had always been in mine. I began writing down every thought, every plan, every observation. The way my father handled money, the subtle arrogance of my mother when she spoke to family friends, the habits they thought were private, they were all notes in a quiet dossier I was building for myself. Not yet revenge, not yet confrontation, just knowledge. And knowledge, I knew, was the most dangerous weapon of all. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, I began to notice small victories. I managed to pay off overdue bills, negotiate rent extensions, and even save a little for emergencies. Each success reminded me that I was capable. Each small win chipped away at the fear that had once paralyzed me. And with every step, I could feel the embers of determination becoming a fire. They had abandoned me, but I was rebuilding. Stronger, smarter, and more resilient than ever. I started venturing out more confidently, attending community events, and connecting with people who might be allies one day. It was subtle at first, a conversation here, a handshake there. I was learning social dynamics I had never needed before, understanding influence, and watching how people reacted when they didn't underestimate me. I was invisible once, but now I wanted to be seen, and carefully. Evenings became a time for reflection. I would sit on the balcony of my small apartment, looking at the lights of the city below, thinking about the life I had lost and the life I could now create. I didn't want pity, and I didn't want to dwell on the betrayal endlessly. I wanted clarity. I wanted control. And slowly, I could feel the person I used to be, helpless, dependent, abandoned, fading away, replaced by someone who refused to be a victim again. By the end of the first month, I had a routine: work, financial management, learning social skills, observing, planning. Nothing about this life was glamorous. Nothing about it was easy. But every step I took reminded me that I was reclaiming something my family had tried to steal: my dignity, my independence, and my ability to survive against anyone who dared abandon me. And somewhere deep inside, a quiet, almost imperceptible thought began to take shape. They thought abandoning me would break me. They were wrong. I wasn't just surviving, I was preparing. I didn't know exactly what the future held, and I didn't yet know how or when I would confront them. But I knew one thing: I would rise from this, and when the time came, they would regret every moment they had ever turned their backs on me. The note still sat on the counter, a symbol of betrayal that had once cut so deep. Now it was a reminder of resilience, of fire forged in solitude, of the beginning of something much larger than survival. And as I closed my eyes that night, exhaustion finally taking me, I realized this was only the start. The beginning of a journey from abandonment to empowerment, from pain to strategy, and from a forgotten daughter to a woman who would one day be untouchable. Months passed, and I slowly began to reshape my life. The emptiness that had haunted my apartment after my parents abandoned me had given way to purpose. I still remembered that first night: the note, the silence, the betrayal. But now, it was like a fuel I carried silently, a quiet determination that nothing and no one would ever abandon me again. My name is Aaliyah Carter, and the girl who had walked into that empty house months ago was no longer the same person. I had a steady job at the accounting firm, one that paid modestly but allowed me to learn more than I had ever expected. My colleagues admired my dedication, but none knew the storm of emotions and purpose driving me. Every spreadsheet I completed, every report I analyzed, felt like another brick in the foundation of a life I was building from scratch. I was no longer just surviving, I was thriving in the shadows of my former despair. But thriving wasn't enough. Survival had taught me patience, and patience was now my ally. I began observing the world my parents had left behind, not in anger, but with precision. The city was full of opportunities, and every person I encountered was a piece of a puzzle. I noticed patterns, social hierarchies, financial behaviors, and subtle arrogance in the people who had abandoned me. Their routines, their habits, the way they flaunted wealth without understanding its fragility, it all became information I could use one day. I started small. I rented a modest studio near a neighborhood my parents had invested in, a place they wouldn't have considered significant. But location mattered. From this vantage point, I quietly watched, learned, and noted. I wasn't spying to destroy. I was observing to understand. Every business they frequented, every social event they hosted, every casual remark they made, it all mattered. Each detail was another thread in the tapestry of the life I was going to reclaim, the justice I would one day command. The first real breakthrough came unexpectedly. While reviewing public financial filings, I noticed a few inconsistencies in my parents' investments. Small oversights, the kind people rarely notice until it's too late. I documented everything meticulously, careful to remain invisible. I wasn't ready to strike. I was laying the groundwork, collecting pieces of a plan that would one day leave them gasping in disbelief. At night, I transformed. My small apartment became a command center of thought, strategy, and planning. I built lists, charts, and timelines. I analyzed conversations I had overheard in passing at cafes, stores, and gatherings, every interaction a lesson in human behavior. My mind sharpened in ways I hadn't imagined. The anger and hurt from their abandonment had evolved into clarity, a clarity that demanded preparation, patience, and precision. Socially, I grew more confident. I attended community events, networking sessions, and public gatherings that my parents had once dominated. People were impressed by my composure, my poise, my intelligence. None suspected that I was the same girl who had been abandoned and left to fend for herself. I was learning the language of influence, understanding the nuances of power and reputation, and quietly building connections that would one day be crucial. Every day I reminded myself of the ultimate truth. My parents had underestimated me. They had abandoned me, thinking it would destroy me. They believed that I would flounder, that I would crumble, that I would disappear quietly into obscurity. But each step I took proved otherwise. Their absence had forced me to grow, to adapt, to become someone who could navigate the world alone and eventually dominate it in ways they could never imagine. Months of meticulous effort began to yield tangible results. I saved steadily, reducing debt and increasing financial independence. I invested in small opportunities they had dismissed as insignificant, carefully monitoring growth and risk. I expanded my social circle strategically, aligning myself with people who respected diligence, intelligence, and discretion. Every action, every decision was a deliberate move toward reclaiming not just what they had abandoned, but what they had taken for granted: my power, my influence, and my dignity. And yet, I didn't rush. Patience had become my strongest weapon. The rush to act too early could ruin everything I had built. I had learned from their arrogance, their carelessness, their blind confidence in the world around them. I would not make the mistake of confronting them unprepared. I needed absolute certainty, leverage so strong that the very foundation of their lives would shift the moment I chose to reveal myself. It wasn't just about revenge, it was about strategy, about creating a scenario where they would be forced to see me not as the abandoned daughter, but as a woman who had survived, adapted, and grown stronger because of every moment of neglect. And with that, I began the most delicate phase of my plan, positioning myself close enough to observe their vulnerabilities in real life without revealing my presence. The first event I attended was a charity gala my parents regularly participated in. I wore a simple but elegant outfit, blending in with the crowd, and quietly noted interactions and dynamics. I saw their arrogance firsthand, the subtle condescension toward people they deemed beneath them, the careless whispers, the dismissive laughs. I documented everything mentally, storing the details for future use. Every flaw, every mistake, every secret they assumed no one would notice became part of the arsenal I was quietly assembling. By the time the gala ended, I understood my own transformation. I was no longer the girl who had walked into an empty house months ago. I had become deliberate, composed, and observant. I had learned to mask the storm inside me with calm, to navigate social currents like a skilled strategist, and to recognize opportunities before others even realized they existed. But it wasn't only about observation. I began making calculated moves in the financial world as well. Small investments, calculated risks, discreet consultations with advisors. I was expanding influence in ways that would surprise them later. Everything was measured. Everything was planned. I was laying the foundation for a confrontation that would leave no doubt. The girl they had abandoned was no longer powerless. And as I walked home one night, the city lights reflecting in my eyes, I felt the first flicker of true anticipation. I wasn't angry anymore. The hurt from abandonment had evolved into something sharper, something precise: determination. I had survived their betrayal, rebuilt my life, and grown stronger than I ever imagined. And one day, all of this, every lesson, every preparation, every quiet victory, would culminate in the moment they would never forget. That night, I sat at my desk, reviewing my notes and mental maps of their routines, habits, and secrets. The spark that had ignited when I first found the note had grown into a controlled fire. I wasn't ready yet to strike, but the storm was forming. And when the day came, it wouldn't just be revenge. They would realize that abandoning me had been the biggest mistake of their lives. Months of preparation had taught me one thing above all else: patience was power, observation was strategy, and survival was only the first step. The girl who had been abandoned was gone. In her place stood Aaliyah Carter, deliberate, calculating, and unstoppable, and the world, my world, was just beginning to bend to the force of what I had quietly become. The night had finally arrived. Months of preparation, observation, and careful strategy had led to this moment. My parents, who had abandoned me and left me to fend for myself, were hosting a grand gala to celebrate what they considered their successes. Invitations had gone out to friends, business associates, and family members, all expecting an evening of elegance and self-congratulation. What they didn't expect was me, Aaliyah Carter, the daughter they had dismissed, the girl they thought had been broken by their betrayal. I stood outside the venue for a moment, adjusting the hem of my dress and smoothing the fabric over my shoulders. Calm, composed, and deliberate. That was the persona I needed. Every step, every gesture, every glance would communicate exactly what I had become: untouchable, confident, and prepared. The girl who had come home to an empty house months ago was gone, replaced by someone who had rebuilt herself from nothing, meticulously, strategically, and without anyone's help. As I walked through the grand entrance, a hush seemed to ripple through the crowd. My parents didn't notice me at first, busy greeting guests and basking in the illusion of their own importance. But then my father's eyes caught mine, widening slightly in disbelief, and a shadow of recognition crossed his face. My mother's smile faltered, her hands trembling just enough for me to notice. For a brief moment, the years of abandonment, the nights of loneliness, the countless sacrifices I had made without acknowledgement, all of it flashed in their eyes, and I saw it, the first crack in their perfect world. I didn't approach them immediately. I let the room adjust, let the tension build. Every conversation I had overheard, every document I had collected, every careful note I had made over the past months was part of this exact moment. I wasn't here for petty revenge or emotional theatrics. I was here to reveal the truth and let them face the consequences of their abandonment. The first move was subtle. I walked up to a few of their closest associates, the people who had attended countless gatherings without ever questioning my family's decisions. I engaged in casual conversation, effortlessly weaving in insights about financial moves, overlooked details, and strategic oversights my parents had made. Eyes widened, whispers began, and it was all perfectly controlled. Every small reaction, every quiver of doubt, was fuel for the confrontation that would follow. Finally, the moment came. I approached my parents directly. My father tried to compose himself, a polite smile plastered on his face, but it didn't reach his eyes. My mother, ever careful about appearances, stiffened, clearly unsure of how to greet me. I didn't say a word at first. I let the silence stretch, letting every heartbeat in the room feel the weight of anticipation. The crowd sensed something was about to happen, a tension they couldn't name but felt unmistakably. I began calmly, deliberately, and with precise clarity. "Do you remember the note you left me?" I asked, my voice measured but resonant. "The one that said, 'You're on your own'?" I kept it. Every word, every act of abandonment, I kept in my mind and in my heart. My parents shifted uncomfortably, the confidence they had always displayed now cracking under scrutiny. Then I revealed what I had spent months preparing. I presented evidence of financial mismanagement, secrets they thought I had never uncovered, and small betrayals that had been hidden behind smiles and polite conversation. Every revelation was methodical, deliberate, and undeniable. Guests whispered, some recoiled, and a few exchanged shocked glances. The family that had abandoned me was now exposed, their arrogance laid bare in a way they could never ignore. It wasn't cruelty, though it may have seemed so to some. It was justice. Every act of abandonment, every moment of neglect, every assumption that I would fail had been meticulously documented and laid bare. I let them feel the weight of their choices, not by raising my voice or creating drama, but simply by presenting the truth they had never expected me to uncover. The room's atmosphere shifted. Admiration and fear mixed with disbelief. I had become a force they could no longer dismiss. The next phase was subtle but equally devastating. I had quietly gained influence in circles my parents had ignored, forming alliances, understanding social hierarchies, and learning the nuances of public perception. When the evidence was presented, it wasn't just about exposing flaws. It was about demonstrating control, competence, and the power that comes from rising after being abandoned. Each revelation, each carefully timed comment, reinforced that I was no longer the powerless daughter they had left behind. I could see it in their faces, panic, regret, and the dawning realization that abandoning me had been a mistake they could not undo. My father's jaw tightened, his usual stern composure faltering. My mother's hands clenched at her sides, a small tremor betraying her internal chaos. And the guests, witnessing everything, began to treat my parents differently, sensing the shift in power. The very family that had celebrated their supposed triumph over me was now struggling to maintain the illusion of control. And yet, even in that moment, I did not act out of malice. I did not need to. The evidence, the subtle manipulations, and the presence I had built were punishment enough. They had abandoned me, underestimated me, and assumed that life would break me. Instead, I had built a life so deliberate, so precise, that the truth alone dismantled their illusion. Every whisper in the room, every glance exchanged between my parents, confirmed what I had known all along. I was no longer someone to be overlooked, dismissed, or abandoned. After the confrontation, I allowed myself a private moment of reflection. I stepped onto the balcony, away from the murmurs, and looked out at the city below. The lights shimmered like stars, reminding me that life, even after betrayal, could be beautiful when rebuilt with intention. I was exhausted, not from anger, but from the intensity of months of preparation and the satisfaction of finally reclaiming my narrative. The weight of abandonment had lifted, replaced by clarity, control, and a sense of freedom I had never known before. Walking back into the gala, I noticed the subtle but unmistakable changes in how people looked at me. There was respect now, curiosity, and perhaps a touch of fear. My parents were forced to reassess not only me, but their own actions and decisions. The family that had abandoned me was no longer untouchable, and the power dynamic had shifted irrevocably. As I left the event that night, I felt a profound sense of closure. I had survived abandonment, rebuilt myself from the ground up, and demonstrated, without theatrics or unnecessary cruelty, that abandoning me had been the greatest mistake of their lives. The streets of the city felt different under my feet, alive, promising, and mine to navigate. I had proven something not just to my parents, but to myself. Survival is strength, resilience is power, and a life reclaimed from betrayal is unstoppable. And as I returned to my apartment, the note that had once haunted me now lay framed on my wall. "You're on your own," it said, a testament not to my abandonment, but to my rise. I had turned pain into purpose, betrayal into strategy, and solitude into empowerment. The girl who had cried on that empty floor months ago was gone. In her place stood Aaliyah Carter, confident, calculated, and untouchable. The world had shifted beneath my feet, and I had never felt more alive, more free, or more certain of my strength.